So this year I've decided to grow my peas and beans up these homemade nets. They're just made out of twine and wrapped and woven around some bamboo canes that I'd lashed together. I think these are 8-footers, so they're quite long. And I've got a sort of a tent structure to them. The front side is opened with the net woven between 2 bamboo canes. And on the other side I've got multiple bamboo canes, and the peas can grow up and wind away around it versus intermingling with the net here. And I'll show you the best way to make these cross at the top, because there's a trick you can apply about having tension between these two to hold on to and help keep still this top part here. So I'll show you how I make these, and if you follow in a couple of months' time I can also show you which side was more successful in terms of having more produce on it, and also maybe being easier to access when it comes time to harvest the crops. Clear away some debris. I'm going to drive this pole in fairly deep, partly because it's an 8-footer, but also obviously the deeper this goes, the more stable it will be. You just have to make sure that as you're driving these in, you've actually got the top at the right angle, because once that's driven in, 12 inches, it'll be really difficult to change how much it tilts, or whether if you've got a bend in the bamboo pole, if you want to rotate it so that it bends the other way, that'll be more difficult. And then at the top here is these 2 poles, and as I drive this down, although I want them to cross at the top, I'm not going to make them cross yet. I'm going to let the bamboo cane that goes across the middle maintain that tension. So if I just cross these like this and then bring this across, the very fact that these are pulling backwards against each other gives it a little bit more rigidity. And then all I need to do is lash around it with some twine to keep it a bit more stable. And I've made a bit of a hole around the base here, so I'm just going to pack that in as well to keep everything a bit more stable. Now, I'm not an expert in knots by any stretch of the imagination, and if you are, or if you know someone who is, or if you know a video out there that's great for knots, stick it in the comments, let everybody else know. But all that I intend to do with these is tie myself a really simple reef knot, which is essentially the same as the first stage of tying your shoes, where you cross the strings over and under each other twice. And if you do that just to hold things in place to get started, then a combination of going around the strings diagonally like this, across, and changing your direction so that diagonal now becomes this way as well, and remembering to pull things tight as you go, should be good enough as long as you have this wound round enough times to keep things all secure. Around the top here and around the bottom. It's always worked for me. Be aware that the nature of the material is such that when it gets wet, it'll tend to stretch. So if there's any give in the structure around it, that's going to put weight and pressure on this. And with this, it's not really, this particular section of it all, it's not really a huge issue, because the weight is all sitting on the cross in the poles here, and they're pushing back up, so you're kind of balanced. But if you're doing this on anything else in your garden, particularly with natural twine like this, the rain will get into it and it'll start to sag, and then as it dries out looser than it was to start with. So then when it comes to actually starting the net, you start by draping a piece of string over the top bar. The number of pieces of string that you'd use to make this is related to the size of the holes that you want your net to have. So if I borrowed the same size of hole that I've used further along the net, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to use 6. So you want to have a bit of string that goes the whole height of the net once, back down again twice, and then if I just stretch down and grab and measure back up again 3 times. And I'm going to cut that there. And the amount of extra length that you have here depends on the size of the holes. So as your net zigzags from side to side, that's what borrows from the length of the piece of string. So if you've got bigger holes, you're going to have longer zigzags from side to side, which means you need to add extra material on. But my recommendation, start with 3 times the up, down, up height. And then with your piece of string, once you've found the midpoint, and make sure that this is the midpoint, because it's very difficult to adjust the length of either side after you attach this here, drape it over the top, and then with that loop that you've just made, reach through and grab your other 2 pieces and pull them all the way through. So with all of your strings tied together across the top, it's time to actually start weaving them together into some diamond shapes. So first thing to do is make sure that your paired strands are actually separated all the way to the bottom before you go and start trying to work with them, otherwise you might end up with some tangles, and you'll have to do this repeatedly as time goes on. And then if you get two strands from neighbouring strings and grip them with one hand, I'm going to assume that you're right-handed, so grip them with your left hand, and then take your finger and thumb like this on the other hand, and with the pair that are together, go from your side of the net through to the other side and wrap the string so that it's essentially made, if I take my fingers out of it, it's made a loop by you doing that. I'll start that again so you can see it one more time. Hold it where you want the knot to be and then wrap around. Then with your fingers, grab the loose ends of the net, the string, put them into your fingers and pull through all the way to the end. And this is why if you haven't separated your strings it can get quite tangled. And then you need to pull this tight. So the top part is where you were holding it initially, that's where you want the knot to be. So try and pull the string so that the knot stays as high up on that bit of slack as you can. And there we go, first knot. So then I'll repeat that over here with the second one. Separate them so I don't get tangled. And the longer your net is, the more difficult this part is with each successive knot that you tie. But the further on you go, the less you've got to straighten out. And then if you want your net to look good, pay lots of attention and care to making sure that you tie your knots at the same height, because if the sooner you knock out this evenness, the more impact it has on the rest of the net as you build it downwards. So here's a diamond that I'm going to complete. I want the knot to be there, so I'll hold it with my non-dominant hand, and with my dominant hand I'll wrap the string around, and then with my open fingers there I'll grab the loose strings and pull them through, and then just tighten that off. There we go. When it comes to doing your second row, it's just exactly the same, and bear in mind the shape of your diamond. When it gets to the edge, all you're going to do is use the bamboo cane as though it's another string and wrap it around. And I don't bother tying it off here because the rest of the knots keep everything at the right height, so you don't need to worry about affixing it to that bamboo cane too much. But where it wraps around the bamboo cane should be at the same height as the rest of your knots, obviously. So I said I would give you one more. Hold where you want the knot to be, wrap around your fingers, grab the strings and pull. So when you're finished, you're going to have your diamond shapes coming all the way down here. And so the question here is, do I do another knot or do I not? So bear in mind that when this gets wet, it's going to stretch and sag a bit. So I think that I could probably get away with not going all the way down to the ground with another diamond. But what I'm going to do, just to give it a bit more length, is take these two threads, these two strings, and just loop them and then do a reef knot here. So that's what I was talking about earlier. That's the first thing, the first half of the knot that you use when you're tying your shoelaces. And then if I just do exactly the same thing again, I'm maybe supposed to go right over left and then left over right, but I do it right over left both times and it always works out for me. Just pull it tight, and then what I've done is I have just added a very simple loop onto the end of this, and then these I'm going to cut off in a few minutes. But what happens now is I'm going to take an extra bamboo cane and I'm going to feed it through all of these loops, and then I'm going to weigh that down with some stones. These rocks might be overkill, but they're the rocks that I have lying around right now. So there we go, a nicely taut net. I think I've done a good job of making the squares all the right size, all the same size, so that's good, I'm pleased with that. And I've just put these two canes on the near side to make that tent structure I was talking about. So check back in a few months and I'll be able to compare whether or not the peas that grew up the net side did any better or any worse than the peas that grew by just winding themselves up these canes on this side.